Hi everyone. My name's Anthony Anaxagorou. I'm currently at Glasgow University. I just did a talk here earlier this afternoon. So yeah, talking from here. I'm a poet. A lot of the work that I do looks at systems of power, colonialism, and the way in which I guess poetry or art as a medium could be used to subvert systems of power and challenge the status quo. One of the projects that I was involved with was with the Museum of the Home, where we were looking at the statue of Robert Jeffrey, and part of the commission was to work with several young people from around the East London area and to see if we could find ways to subvert what this Jeffrey statue stood for. He was a slaver. He was pretty pernicious man. So we were looking at how we could tackle something like that through poetry. And Lessons in Gravity, which was a pamphlet that the young people put together, was, I guess, it was the corollary of several months of discussion and talk around, one, the function of poetry and how it works, but also two, what we can do as artists to try and subvert. I don't necessarily believe that poetry has the power to change things at the level of policy, but I believe that it can rattle and awaken the senses, which is its own form of protest and action. So one of the things that we were really keen to do is not rant. So we didn't want to kind of, state the obvious. And the discussions around what the statue represented symbolically became part of the weekly discussions that we would have. And I kind of feel that, the people that were in the group, some were as young as 16, some were 22, 23. And it was really interesting to see how everyone brought their own experiences to the room, to the session. And there were some people who were English. So, we looked at nationalism, how nationalism worked in this context. And then we also looked at the ways in which you could subvert nationalism, how you could complicate and problematize nationalism while still being a British national, which I am. My family is Cypriot, but I was born in London. And do something interesting without being didactic and without being ranty, but also something artful, which I think was something that we constantly kept coming back to. It has to be more than just telling us what the problem is. So I think poetry as a kind of medium has the capacity to hold all these different complexities, all these different arguments and tensions, which is what we found when exploring something like, the slave trade. And there were people in the room, in the group, who were Black and, whose ancestors might have not as been affected as others were. But what was, I think, beautiful about it was we all managed to kind of hold space for each other and find our own way in. Whether you were English, non-English, Black or non-Black or white or whatever it might have been, we all found a way to kind of look at what the statue represented, because that was really the main aim. What does the statue represent, as opposed to, slavery was abhorrent and this guy was a nasty piece of work. So that was it. I think that was the real, you're going to hear from Tom and Rojbin, who were two of the participants on the course in a bit. I'm going to read you something here that I think kind of exemplifies the kind of, I guess, the kind of thing that I'm talking about here. And this poem is called For Those Who Demand Evidence. What I wouldn't give to turn silent today, to lead the front line of language towards the cliff, dropping my sad mornings beside some gentle accident. It's my friends I'm thinking of, dead inside their faultless bodies, offering up ground. I'll donate a modicum of hard cash to the approaching circus. 2 fatigued elephants carting heirlooms, rebranding this new age vacuum-packed consciousness. I wish I could play an instrument on days like today, a stoned pianist with poor posture, forfeiting moral hands for the freedom of a chord. I swear to be part of anything that sees me. I can't stress this enough. A famous past stole our homes. My family survived empire, a violence to my father's head. I was only a boy then with squeaky clean shoes, his pants all sullied. Now I'm paying institutions to read up on what was originally mine. Ripping body parts off eugenicists, bigots preserved in specimen jars. England, I've spent so long inside your history, it's like there will never be another way round this black torch, held between your fangs, clapping at the end of an American movie. How do we stop? Let love move us naturally. Dodge another set knee, the weight of our dead. One last plea, what I wouldn't give to turn silent today. Before statistics catch a siren, turn into a baton, swinging meat, slave roads shimmying under brute force, the second coming down above his temple, her pelvis cracking law into order, forced to beg a badge, says what it wants, my friends, lost to daylight appearances, a platoon of cameras, my country, your country, rolling like jackals, thick with a sickness for blood, blonde, blue, white. So that was a poem from a book that I've just published called Heritage Aesthetics that kind of looks at colonial histories and the way that power is preserved. I'm going to ask Rojbin if she wouldn't mind coming on now just to talk a little bit about how she found the process and what we did on the program.
Hi everyone, I'm Rojbin. For me, kind of echoing what Anthony has said, being able to reflect on my own identity and how I write about my own identity. I think with Anthony, especially working with him was great because we were allowed to write open-ended poems and we were allowed to almost allow the readers to set up a campsite within the margins of the poems that we were writing. With the question of the statue, we were encouraged to write around the statue rather than writing at it, and coming from a point of anger and frustration. Rather, we were encouraged to look at it through other people's perspectives as well. It was quite a interesting work of collaboration. Like Anthony said, we all came from different backgrounds, different ethnic backgrounds, racial backgrounds, different genders and sexualities. And so it was a great kind of cocktail of difference that we were able to work with. I write mainly on language, womanhood, and exile, are like my holy trinities, if you will. So for me, it was kind of the perfect way of developing my own creative practice, my own poetry. Having this statue as a reminder of Britain's colonial past allowed me to kind of think about my own issue with borders and states and immigration.
That's amazing. And I guess one of the questions that I had was, what do you feel you kind of learned, one, about how you take on, I know we spoke about this, but for the seminar here, what do you feel that you discovered or learned about how poetry can take on these very big and complex subjects, like poetry as an art form, how it can take it on?
That's interesting. I think something that I'm learning more and more is to understand that I can use my identity when I want to, and it's mine to use it, it's mine to write about, and it's mine to decide what it looks like and how it reads on the page and the words I use. And more I'm trying to carve more space for giving myself permission to write about my Kurdishness the way I see fit. So, you know, being able to say, here's 2 minutes about my Kurdishness, and now I'm telling you about grapefruits, is actually a really good way of putting it for me, because sometimes it's a heavy burden to carry, feeling like you're representing a whole nation, millions of people, because you're the only person who's Kurdish in the room. Being asked about being stateless, being asked about wars in the Middle East, it's quite intense. And I want my poetry to be a way of access, a point of access to Kurdishness, to people who don't know about it. But also I write for me and for my own kind of sanity as well, which is something that I'm learning, to write about grapefruits, essentially.
Yeah, that's great. Where did you put the grapefruit analogy? Someone said that, isn't it? I read that somewhere, that you put, I can write about this, but also about...
Yeah.
Who was? Oh yeah, the only Ross. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. And I think
Yes.
I'm gonna bring Tom in now as well if he wouldn't mind, just to talk about how he found the course.
Yeah, I thought it was great. One, just to be able to work within an institution like the Museum of the Home and being like allowed access into these British institutions. But furthermore, I think the project as a whole really helped me develop this kind of political poetics that I've been working on for the past couple of years. And especially like what Anthony said about not being didactic and not ranting, and how to kind of manipulate language and syntax to the point where it does resist the nation state without having to shout from a rooftop about it. And yeah, and like I was one of the only white British people in this group, and that was really fascinating as well, like listening to everyone else's perspective on this, because at the end of the day we are all subjects of Britain and power, and everyone's still coming from writing within this point of crisis which we're at now. Yeah, it was really, really rewarding.
And I guess the same question, like, how do you feel that poetry as an art form has, I guess I'm asking this because everyone keeps asking me this wherever I'm going at the moment, but poetry is an art form. How do you feel? Is it fit? Is it able to kind of carry the weight and the complexities of these very tenuous and multifaceted subjects, do you feel?
Yeah, and again, it is a really complex question. There isn't an answer to this, or though there isn't one singular answer to this. And I think your book is a wonderful wonderful example of this, Anthony.
I didn't pay him for that to happen, by the way. No,
promise,
that just
promise. This how you manipulate the language of politics that's so prevalent in like every day now that we have like social media everywhere and the news, 24-hour news cycle, and using this language of politicians, which means nothing to them. It's just absolute verbosity at the point to fill space and time. But if you manipulate that language of power into something actually meaningful and caring, I think it can go a long way. So that's what I'm interested in at the minute.
Amazing. Do you both want to read? Have you got poems from the pamphlet that you could both share before? We've got about 5 minutes. There it is, right there. Lessons in Gravity. All right, Rojbin, let's kick off with you, and then we'll go over to Tom.
Okay, so I'm going to read Beidev, which means mouthless in Kurmanji, and it reads like this: 2 big eyes pull at a tongue. Together they probe a hole, patched with braces, eye cavity. My English is happening, disturbed, boiling up from the top of my cramp nouns, rooting stones in my gums, eye gap, squares of yawning breath. As matriarchal verbs rust inside my molars, my jaw gulps away from the hurt. I root. English grunts up my opening, adverbials flesh at the dome of my mouth, my nasty mouth. I swallow. Kurdish authorities swing 7 arms from my canines, genesis of the anarchistic spit. I crooked. English lolls at the 5 vowels, bending backwards over pronunciations, dialectic death by tonsil fingering. I decay. Protest songs slip off my Cupid's bow, refusal implanted to my incisors, my tongue falls right into my lap. That's it.
Thank you so much. That was amazing. That was great. My tongue falls into my lap. What an English. Thanks, Rojbin. Tom.
I'm going to read By Contrast, My Alcove. By contrast, my alcove is teeming with microplastics, chewing on hops, eyes hooded like monks, brewing a recipe that never alters, in a structure that never alters, like lead, sickly to lick with a peasant tongue, a crone tongue, upright as an icon. Everything has been said about time, except that it unfurls like spores of lead under a sycamore, older than serfdom. I wonder what monks do for fun. The grass looks fake in the almshouse. I want to chew on something gross, to digest power into bite-sized chunks, and lock myself away for as long as it takes to drive reparations down the M1. Tell me something fun now, something intractable. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you both. Thank you so much for that. And I guess to conclude, I don't necessarily, as Tom was saying, and I think as Roger has said as well, I don't think that the job of poetry is necessarily to offer solutions. I don't think it's a solution-based art form. I think one of its functions, and even does poetry have a utility, is a very kind of neoliberal way of thinking about art. You know, what can we extract from it? What could we capitalize on? What could we use? In a way that I guess language and sense and meaning have both become capitalist endeavors. If we can't extract meaning from a line of poetry straight away, then it must be rendered obsolete, because there's nothing that this line can't benefit me in any way. But I think if we start thinking about language as experiential data, which what I think language in poetry is, and we read it with our senses and we read it with feeling, then I think the job of the poem can talk truth to power in a way that isn't didactic, or in a way that, you know, you don't, like Rojbin said, and one of the things I was kept re-emphasizing throughout the workshop was, don't look at your subject, look at your subject from the side, or look at it from the top, or look at it from the bottom. Because if you look at the thing in the face, you just tell people what they know. And so I kind of feel that what the poets did in the time that we had together was add complexity to something that was already very complicated. And I think within that, you create a kind of a semblance of truth. And then we discussed, you know, what does truth mean? Truth is fractal, truth is subjective, truth is whimsical, it's ever changing. And I kind of feel that all of these ideas and notions are contained within the functionality of a poem, simply because of the fact that the people that make it are honouring and reflecting the complexities of their lives, which is why the poem has to have that. And a lot of us were working class people, autodidactic, who were coming from places that weren't traditionally preserved, of middle class white folk. And so to have all those voices and those ideas in a room, it was massively powerful.